Hello, and welcome to our continuing series on Solomon, his life. We say Solomon, the three W's: wisdom, wealth, and women. We're continuing our series today, looking at context in Solomon's life. And so if you remember last week, we finished up, our last lesson, we finished up with God granting Solomon's wish for wisdom and discernment and knowing right from wrong. So that's where we're going to pick up today. My name is Steve Turner. I teach Sunday school here at First United Methodist in Starkville. And if you like these series on Solomon, we do this live every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock here at the church. So let's start here and turn. We're in 1 Kings. That's where we learn more about Solomon. He's also in some other places. But if you remember last week, God asked Solomon what he would like. He said, "Ask whatever you want to give me," God says in 1 Kings 3:5. And Solomon answered, You've shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased with this. Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment and administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. Then Solomon awoke, and he realized it had been a dream. So we see here that Solomon asked for wisdom so that he could govern well. We think he says he's just a child. We think he's in his teen years. So he's very young, and he knows that this responsibility he's been given by his father. Remember, his father, there was some intrigue going on, but his father finally placed Solomon on the throne of Israel. And again, this is the United Kingdom, so this is a big deal. So, right out of the chute here, the author of 1 Kings is going to tell us that Solomon asked for discernment in heart and knowing right from wrong and how to rule his people. So he's going to give us an example very quickly. And this is a famous example. And so we're going to read this, and then we'll stop and we'll discuss this example of Solomon's wisdom. And you got to remember, he's very young. So some say he's around 15 or he's in his teenage years. So he's become king, but he's very young. And as we all know, those of us who are older are very suspicious of young rulers. We think they don't have enough wisdom and experience. So now we're in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 16, and this is the famous decision that Solomon is known for. Now 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said, "Pardon me, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I had a baby while she was there with me. The 3rd day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the 2 of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by my breast. The next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't the son I had born. The other woman said, "No, the living one is my son, the dead one is yours." But the first one insisted, "No, the dead one is yours, the living one is mine." And so they argued before the king. The king said, "This one says, 'My son is alive, and your son is dead.' While that one says, 'No, your son is dead, and mine is alive.'" Then the king said, "Bring me a sword." So they brought a sword for the king. He then gave an order, "Cut the living child in two, and give half to one and half to the other." The woman whose son was alive was deeply moved out of love for her son, and said to the king, "Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him." But the other said, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two." Then the king gave his ruling, "Give the living baby to the first woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother." When all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe, because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. All right. So many of you have heard this story, read this story where split the baby. That's kind of what we know this as. And Solomon, again, this is the first example we see of Solomon as a young man making a decision that has taken a lot of discernment to know the truth. So what he's after here is the truth between these two conflicting stories that come from these two women. There's only one baby that's alive, one is dead, but the two mothers both say the living child is theirs. So what does Solomon do? Well, he knows that the true mother of the child does not want this child to die. And so he basically says, he doesn't say we'll put the child to death. He says, logically, we'll cut the baby in half and give half to each woman, each mother. But of course, we know that if you cut the baby in half, both mothers will have a dead half of a baby. Now, one woman already had a dead baby, but she was grieving, she was hurt. She wanted a baby. She had a baby, she lost her baby, and so she wanted a baby. The other woman who had a baby, she loved that baby, and she wanted that baby to continue to live and grow up into adulthood. If the only way she could do this was to give the baby away, she was willing to do that. And somehow Solomon knew that the real mother would not want the baby to die. And so he made this situation occur where the true mother would reveal herself. And in this case it did. Now, what we see here is that Solomon now has the trust of his community. He has proven that he has wisdom beyond a normal amount of wisdom. And so the key verses here is at the end of this story, at the end of this situation, in verse 26, when all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe, because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. So what does that tell us about a leader, a kingship? Well, the most important thing there is to administer justice. And so what we see here is God has given Solomon an amount of just amount of wisdom so that he can do what his responsibilities as king are. So that's the first example. So now we go into the next example is administration. So now we know that Israel, the nation of Israel, because of what David has done and set up, it's a powerful nation, both militarily and economically. They're going to be powerful, and under Solomon's reign, which is going to be about 40 years, which is equal to David's 40 years, they're going to really rise in prominence, they're going to rise in wealth, they're going to rise in honor. And if you remember, when Solomon asked for wisdom, God told him, because you've asked for this, you're going to get a lot more. You're going to get wealth and honor among all nations. So the next thing we see is in Solomon's government. We saw in previous lessons that he took care of his enemies, so to speak. He got rid of them, he got them out of the picture. And what we see now is he's going to place people that he trusts in positions of power. So we see in chapter 4, King Solomon ruled over all Israel. So this is all 12 tribes. And these were his chief officials. So he appoints a priest, secretaries, recorders, commanders-in-chiefs, district governors, advisors to the king, palace administrators, and someone in charge of forced labor. So he starts to get his administration in place, people he's trusting, and then he has 12 district governors over all Israel. So he gets this administrative structure in place whereby he can rule Israel and he can administer allocation of resources, he can administer justice, and so on and so on. So again, that's the second example of his wisdom. Now we see over here at the end of chapter 4, again, the author of 1 Kings tells us about Solomon's wisdom. And so in verse 29, chapter 4, says, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the east, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else, including Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame spread to all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He spoke about plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls. He also spoke about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. From all nations people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. So again, if you remember, it says that God says that no one will ever have the amount of wisdom that Solomon had in the past or in the future. So that really says that even today, no one is as wise as Solomon. That's quite a statement. So it's knowledge. So we talked about what exactly is wisdom. So it includes knowledge and information. And you can see here that Solomon has knowledge about plant life, about animal life. He knows about human behavior. So he's very knowledgeable. And the key here is the breadth of his knowledge, the breadth and the depth of his knowledge, but also his ability to make decisions. So again, we're reminded that this wisdom comes from God, and we're going to see this when we start our lessons on Proverbs, which we'll move to after we look a little more at Solomon's life. So what he does next, so he puts his officials in place, he's got his administration, and then he starts a building project, or several projects. Basically, he's going to build the temple. He's going to put all the furnishings and all the adornments in the temple. He's going to build a palace for himself, for his wives. And then he's going to start rebuilding towns. And so he does all these things, and that's basically the text we have in the next several chapters. And so we know it took Solomon, let's see, I think it took him 7 years to build a temple. Now, one of the things we talked about previous was his alliances and how he built wealth. One of the things he did was he aligned himself with different countries, with different nations that had certain resources. So we see in chapter 5, says, we start chapter 5, when Hiram, king of Tyre, heard that Solomon had been anointed king to succeed his father, he sent his envoys to Solomon because he had always been on friendly terms with David. And Solomon and Hiram are going to be important alliances in Tyre, because Tyre has cedar, it has juniper, it has resources that Solomon is going to need for his building projects. And there's going to be trade between the two. And they're going to be friends. They're going to be not only trading partners, but they're going to be friends also. So we see in chapter 6, verse 37, the foundation of the temple of the Lord was laid in the 4th year, in the month of Ziv. In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, the 8th month, the temple was finished in all its details according to its specifications. He had spent 7 years building it. So it took him 7 years to build the temple, and it was quite a place. And then we see in chapter 7, he starts on his palace. It took Solomon 13 years, however, to complete the construction of his palace. So again, it's going to take him a total of 13 and 7, 20 years to build his palace and the temple. And God is going to be very pleased with him building the temple. And so he's going to let him know. So he's going to, at the dedication of the temple, Solomon has this very ornate, long prayer where he dedicates the temple to God and asks for blessings. And then we see in chapter 9, when Solomon had finished building the temple of the Lord and the royal palace and had achieved all he had desired to do, you got to remember this is 20 years, halfway into his reign. So he's got his temple, he's got the palace, he's going to start to rebuild cities. It says, the Lord appeared to him a second time, as he appeared to him at Gibeon. The Lord said to him, I have heard the prayer and plea you have made before me. I have consecrated this temple which you have built by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. As for you, if you walk before me faithfully with integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did, and do all I command and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever. As I promised David your father when I said, you shall never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I've given you, and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them, and will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. Israel will then become a byword and an object of ridicule among all people. This temple will become a heap of rubble. All who pass by will be appalled and will scoff and say, Why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this temple? People will answer, because they have forsaken the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and have embraced other gods, worshiping and serving them. That is why the Lord brought all this disaster on them. So again, God appears the second time to Solomon and gives him a warning. I'm here with you, but this is conditional on you following my commands, my decrees, and being the person I want you to be. At the end of 20 years during which Solomon built these two buildings, the temple of the Lord and the royal palace, King Solomon gave 20 towns in Galilee to Hiram, king of Tyre, because Hiram had supplied him with all the cedar and juniper and gold he wanted. Hiram didn't really like the towns that Solomon gave him, but again, he took them and he sent Solomon more gold. So again, Solomon, after 20 years, he's got this building. People now can visit him and see this temple and palace and see what a grand place it is. Probably one of the grandest places in the world at that time. His reputation has spread throughout the world, and now he's going to be visited by people. He's going to continue to build. He's going to continue to acquire more alliances. He's going to do that with respect to, again, we talked about his wisdom, his wealth, and his women. The next thing that occurs is he has a visit from this woman. Her name is, we don't have her name, but we know that she's the Queen of Sheba. And many of you will recognize this story. And the Queen of Sheba is often referred to. One of our classmates in our Sunday school told the story when she was young and she was acting a little big for her britches, so to speak. Her mother said, "Who do you think you are? Do you think you're the Queen of Sheba?" So the thought there is the Queen of Sheba is a very important person. She's a ruler. And so we know that she visited Solomon. We know in chapter 10 it says, when the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relationship to the Lord, she came to test Solomon with hard questions. So again, she arrived with all kinds of camels carrying spice, large quantities of gold and precious stones. And she talked with him about all kinds of questions: plants, animals, human behavior, nations, things like that. When the Queen of Sheba, in verse 4, saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. She said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievement and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw them with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth, you have far exceeded the report I have heard." So again, at the end it says, King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Then she left and returned with her retinue to her own country. So again, his fame has spread throughout the world. We have people, very famous people, coming in, visiting him, questioning him, asking him questions, and he continually impresses. He's also very, very wealthy. So what's the lesson for us today with this lesson we've just covered? Well, again, at this point, Solomon's heart is in the right place, but he's at risk. And why do I say Solomon is at risk? Well, one of the things that happens to us is when we acquire assets and acquire wealth, we become self-confident. We think that all of these things have come from us, and we've developed these things, and we deserve these things. And so what happens is we forget where the true blessings and the true wealth truly comes from. And again, that comes from God. So again, we're going to see as we continue to look at Solomon's life how this risk came into play and it drew him away from God, as many times that's what happens to us. The things that we've learned, the things that we know, we forget those and we gravitate to other kinds of things that are not godly and that take us away from both a good relationship with God and with our fellow human beings. I want to thank you for being with us. We'll continue the next time as we look at the life of Solomon. Thank you very much.